And answers, I have to just tell you two stories actually on that theme. Both Upendra Chivukula and Sadhbir Chowdhury have played upon unusual names. Upendra would say that if you want to know how to pronounce my name, what would he say? Drive a Chevy, drink a cola. And which is hysterically fun. When he says it, it's just hysterically funny, and as opposed to me botching the joke. And also with respect to Sadhbir Chowdhury, one of his campaign jokes was, "With me, you get extra long lawn signs." And the other thing, and he also said that an advantage to electing him to public office is that you could use his name in field sobriety tests. So.
And he's chair of justice.
Yeah, he's now the chair of the Justice Committee. Right.
Justice systems, yeah.
Well, you know, as a guy who did change his name, and that was difficult for me to do that. It was odd. I know the camera's on, and it should stay on, but I've never talked about it really publicly. I grew up Muslim, and my father was devout Muslim. He had raised the money to set up the mosque that was one of the first mosques in Michigan, and I was raised going to the mosque with him. But I chose in my heart to convert to Christianity, and also being the only child, and both my parents, once they were deceased, I wanted to also honor my mother as well. So I changed my name legally to Clarke. It was very difficult. My middle name is Hashim, which was my dad's last name and my last name, and I typically don't use it. I do believe this. This is not necessarily, a political point I'm trying to make, but I am. But I think Barack Obama's candidacy really helps us out a lot, regardless if you support him a lot, because people now throughout the world are going to be accustomed to supporting someone that may not have an Anglo name. Now, for me being Indian, here's how it really helped me out big time. Is that now again I use the oh my God, I just saw someone I really know here. Anyway, is that Priya Dayananda back there? It really is. Okay. Wow. Okay.
And doesn't she look marvelous?
Priya, I was telling everybody about that shirt you got me. I actually wore it during the campaign last summer. That's how I beat that guy. Remember I told you about this shirt that I anyway. So anyway, the point I was trying to make is this. Is that because I represented and grew up in areas like Anacostia, and I was the only guy that looked like this, is that years later, when I come back, neighborhood, people say, "Oh yeah, I remember you." They only see me like one time when I was like 7 years old, but they definitely remember me at 37. Okay, yeah. So that was probably the one practical advantage. And because Detroit, there's no Indians in the city of Detroit at all, that people do remember me and recognize me. In fact, there was a guy from Bangladesh that was running for state rep in some other area, and people thought he was me. He doesn't look like me, but to everybody else, we all look alike. So anyway, but the final point is, and I'll be brief on it. I kind of touched on it. My dad was a well-versed guy. Again, he would read all these foreign affairs publications. But when I found out, I thought my dad didn't have a formal education, because back when he was raised, and this was like probably in the 1915 or something, his dad died, and he was the oldest child. So I guess according to culture and tradition, he had to quit education and raise the family. So he did. So I remember I asked my mother this one thing. I said, "So Dad didn't have an education, but why was he so into all these, policy stuff and everything like that?" And my mother told me something I'll never forget. She says, "Your dad in his own country did not have the right to vote. So that's why." See, he never, ever, ever told me to get involved in politics. None of my parents never did. But what he did by his conduct, by his interest, by his activity in foreign affairs and politics, his actions showed me that this is a respectable way to serve people through politics. That it is because my father was born in unified India in 1910 that I'm an elected official today.
Right. You know, I'd like to discuss something that popped into my mind because Subodh is sitting here. Many years ago, you're going to think this is kind of silly, but I think it's actually an important issue. Many years ago, a friend of mine called me up and said, you know, you're an Indian American. I just saw this new TV show called The Simpsons, and they've got this Indian American character on it, and I think it's just appalling. You ought to protest this. You ought to and this is not an Indian American. This is a, you know, a European American, and they felt offended for me about Apu. And I decided, I said, well, you know, I don't know, maybe should I be offended by this? I kind of liked Apu. And I called up Subodh. I called up Subodh, and there's this pause on the phone. He says, well, I like Apu. And it was funny because I think it's important for us to go to bat for our community. It's also really important for us to have a sense of humor and not to overreact. Every year in the General Assembly, we have something called Legislative Follies. It's a comedy show where we raise money for charity, and it's typified by really bad acting and bad singing. And it's appalling. It's appalling and appallingly funny. But one of the characters I have every year is this Karnak knockoff called Kumar the Magnificent, where I'm carried out onto stage by 4 legislators. They're wearing turbans, I'm wearing a turban, and I put up an envelope to my head, and I tell you what the question is, you know, and you know, I tell you, I say what the answer is, and then I read the question. It's like Karnak, and it's usually very politically incorrect, and typically every year on the front page of the Gazette is a photograph of me wearing a turban. We have to, I mean, I think it's important, especially since we're a member of a community that is so microscopically small and unknown in the broader American community. I think it's important for us to have a sense of humor. Right. That also helps us, and it helps, I think having a sense of humor generally helps put all of what you go through in politics in proper perspective. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Great.
Okay. I had a similar, but it's not as funny as yours. As a freshman, I could pass quite a few bills, and I was a floor manager. So one of my friend, a colleague, a Democrat, and she came to me and she said, so how do you get all these things done? So one of my friend who is Republican said, she has brown eyes. And I said, so every time something would pass, and even this year when I did what I was supposed to do, they would send an email to me, oh, brown eyes, brown eyes, brown eyes. So everybody else
tell them the mango ice cream story. We've run out of time, but you have to tell them the mango ice cream.
Do we have time for the mango ice cream?
I want to get a mango ice cream.
Oh, in the tradition we have. Okay, we have a tradition in Iowa that the last meeting, that's the one you're talking about,
yeah.
Right? The last meeting, if you are a chair of a committee, you have to bring something. Usually people bring cookies and things like that. But I decided that I will make mango ice cream with peaches. And so everybody said, okay, now we have to eat mango ice cream because we have to respect Swati's heritage and culture. And I said, okay, well, if you don't want it, that's fine. You know, I really worked hard to make this mango ice cream. I worked really hard.
The guilt.
And so they said, okay, we'll eat. And then one of an elderly legislator came and he said, Swati, this ice cream needs peach schnapps on it. And it will taste good. And I said, well, no, we have rules. We cannot do that. So, but it was really funny that my ice cream was all gone. I mean, and I wanted to eat my share, and it was not there. And so,
that was even without the liquor on it.
yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah, and he's quite old, but he said, well.
Okay.
So that's the one. That's the one you're talking about.
Yeah, well, and they're going to be pretty mad at you if you don't do it next year. So
yes,
now that you've converted them,
now I have to.
You've made them into functional daisies.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I want to thank all the panelists, Kumar, Swati, and Hansen.
Thanks.
And